Good morning. Welcome to Sports Desk Live on Comcast Channel 26, also streamed on Facebook. I'm your host, Ed Nunez. With us today is a very special guest, retired UNM Valencia history professor, Richard Melzer, author of a book about Don Perkins, A Champion's Life. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
You know, Richard, I saw your little excerpt in the journal a couple of weeks ago, and I was intrigued by that right away because I'm always looking for new material to bring on the show, whether it be on the sports desk or a radio show I do in town. But tell us a little bit about your journey in writing a book. Don Perkins, by the way, former UNM superstar, halfback and tailback, retired his number here at the university, and then also a former Dallas Cowboy. We'll get into all the stats when we can. But tell us a little bit about your interest. History writer, right? You're a professor of New Mexico history. Tell us your interest in Don Perkins.
Well, I had a wonderful student named Karen Perkins, and she is his daughter, and she was one of my students. And one day she just suggested that I meet him and maybe write a book about him. So I was busy doing something else, but I really wanted to meet Don Perkins. So we arranged it, and sure enough, we got to meet, and he was such a fabulous person. I couldn't resist writing the book. It took some time, especially with COVID, but we got it done.
You know, Richard, near the end of his life, a couple of, and you mentioned the kind of person Don was. I think my wife put it best. He made everybody feel good about themselves. He had a lot of accolades. Certainly as the university, and you mentioned those are fans of the Dallas Cowboys. I've been a fan since '70. He's in the Ring of Honor. So when people see that, it's like football immortality. And Don was very much about who are you? Tell me about you. Tell us a little bit about your interactions. And you met him later in his life. So tell us a little bit about your interactions with him when you first met him.
You're absolutely right. Everyone says that he put you at ease right away. The excellent sports writer, Rick Wright, did his first interview for the Journal in 1976, and it was with Don Perkins. And Rick was nervous about it, as understandably, but he sat down and he felt like he was old friends with Don right away, and that's how I felt when I first met him.
You know, it's funny because I met him later when I was too young. I told you I've been a fan since of the Dallas Cowboys since 1970 and a diehard. You know, my wife looks at me now. I don't even get mad anymore because I wait for the the shoe to drop. You know, I keep saying this is their year, and I don't even say that anymore. But I didn't get it. You know, I had to go back to films and watch him in a fullback. He was a fullback with the Dallas Cowboys. Made All Pro 6 times, rushed for 6,217 yards, and retired early. You know, retired after 7 years, walked away from the game. He had an outstanding career here at the University of New Mexico, rushing for over 2,000 yards. But I think that only begins to tell a little bit about the story. Tell us, without giving away your book, and we certainly are going to pump up your book and hype it up. Tell us how long it took to write it. We've got some great pictures in the second part of the show. Some of those pictures I had to look at 3 times because it shows a young Don Perkins, just an amazing guy. Tell us a little bit about how this book came about from, beginning to end, in the middle, how did it come about?
Well, like I said, Karen, his daughter, suggested it, and I got to meet him several times before COVID, thank goodness, because after COVID started, he was in a nursing home, and we couldn't visit him. But I met him 3 times. We had long interviews. He was very patient with me, answered all my questions, very, very kind. And then, of course, it's the long process of writing and publishing. It's published by the University of New Mexico Press, and they're meticulous. They're just incredible. It takes a while for them to produce a book. It just came out this year. I started in 2019, but the finished product is always excellent.
You know, it's especially when it concerns one of Albuquerque's favorite sons. I wasn't able to watch him play, of course, here at the University of New Mexico. He played for Marv Levy, the former Buffalo Bills coach, who took the Bills to 4 Super Bowls. And, Marv Levy had a way with words. I still remember him on NFL films. Used to be one of my favorite things to watch. They don't do NFL films with the voice of John Facenda. John Facenda had that voice when you heard him. This is football, but this is like drama, the music and everything that surrounded it. But Marv Levy, he actually played here under Coach Levy at the University of New Mexico, and it's at Zimmerman Field, not a university stadium. And I never saw Zimmerman Field. I've been to University Stadium plenty of times. Did he talk about that at all? Did he talk about playing at Zimmerman Field? Did he talk about playing for the legendary Marv Levy?
Well, you know, Marv Levy was a coach up in Iowa, and he was aware of Don Perkins as a great running back for the Waterloo High School team. And but Don wasn't recruited by the University of Iowa. They considered him to be too small. He was about 5'10" and 200 pounds. And so when Marv Levy came to UNM, he looked up Don Perkins and a number of other great players from Iowa, and recruited him from down here. That's the Iowa connection.
Yeah, Waterloo, Iowa. He was born in 1936 and just died June 9th, 2022. And, you know, is a big blow. He lived a great life. I saw him at Bud Ellis Coffee Shop a couple of years ago. I'm not sure he recognized me anymore, but when you saw him, you mentioned that. We mentioned that, the way he made other people feel. Again, he's the star. He was on Channel 7 for a while as a sports anchor. You know, we mentioned, I was going to tell you that story about him playing Frederick Douglass. He did a lot of things after football, a whole bunch of things. Can you tell us about a few of those things? He wasn't defined just by football, not at all. He had family. He did things here in the city. Can you tell us a little bit about his career after football?
Right. Well, it's interesting. Don never sought out jobs. There's only one job I can think of that he sought out. They sort of fell in his lap because he had these natural talents, including becoming a football player. When he was in junior high, they couldn't wait to put him in a uniform because they recognized his talents so early. But after playing for the Cowboys, he was a sportscaster. He had a tremendous voice, excellent.
Yes, he did.
Voice, very distinct. And he was a sportscaster on CBS football for several years. And then he became a broadcaster for KOA TV in Albuquerque. After that, he worked, he also worked for the Dave Cargo administration and Bruce King in government. He enjoyed those roles. And then he became he worked with the Albuquerque police in community relations mostly. But his favorite job, I think, and the one that he sought out was to be a truck driver. And so for a year, 1986, he took off and he drove across the country because he loved to be by himself. He loved to be with people, but he especially loved to be and work by himself. And he could do that with the truck.
Truck driving job. Richard, we're going to take a break, and when we come back in the second half of the show, we'll show those amazing photos that when people see them, they're going to, wow, that's all I can say. That's going to be the reaction. We'll be back after these messages on the Sports Desk.
Don't sacrifice quality of flavor when you're in a hurry. Golden Pride offers ribs, fried chicken, green and red chili breakfast burritos, and Frontier Cinnabons. 4 great locations, or visit us online at goldenpride@abq.com. Golden Pride Barbecue Chicken and Ribs, proud supporter of ProView Sports Network.
Dream Style Roofing tops them all. When your roof's worn out, it needs to be replaced. We're gonna do it right, put a smile on your face. They're at home, things are looking up when you get your roof done by someone you can trust. Dream Style, a company name that's been around forever. No one does it better. You need a new roof, you know who to call. Dream Style Roofing tops them all.
We fight the battles no one hears about.
We drop into the middle of firefights to rescue others.
And act as one-man air traffic control towers. We're the ones who go before all others.
U.S. Air Force Special Warfare are proud supporters of ProView Sports.
is a proud supporter of ProView Networks.
Welcome back to the Sports Desk live on Comcast Channel 26, also streamed on Facebook. Our very special guest today is retired UNM Valencia history professor Richard Melzer, the author of a book by Don Perkins, A Champion's Life. Richard, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
You know, Richard, you're originally from Teddy Roosevelt's hometown of Oyster Bay, New York, New Mexico resident since 1973, earning your PhD in history at UNM in 1979. You taught at the Valencia campus from 1979 to 2019, retiring as UNM Regents Professor of History. You also earned the New Mexico's Outstanding Teacher of the Year Award. A little background on you. You're a resident of Belen, New Mexico now, and that's one of the questions we wanted to ask, because most of your research and work has been on New Mexico history. New Mexico history-wise, was there any sports figure that you've ever written about besides Don Perkins?
I wrote a biography of Casey Luna. Many people remember him for his Ford dealership and as lieutenant governor, but he was also a very, very successful as a car racer in the 1950s. He won two Albuquerque championships, and then he owned his own car, sprint car, and he won two national championships in that competition.
That's anybody that remembers Casey Luna, Ford Mercury in Belen. I probably didn't do it justice there, but see, that's some history there that people probably wouldn't know that about Casey Luna. I didn't. So that's some good stuff there. Well, hopefully we're gonna get these pictures up here. Let's go back to Don Perkins. You mentioned he liked to be by himself, which 1986 he goes and is a truck driver for a year. We do have to talk about there's the truck driver right there. There's the picture of Don driving that truck. I don't know if you can see that or not, but we also have to ask about, and people are going to ask, and I asked Nick Backus, a very good friend of mine. You're going to meet with him tomorrow. Nick's a very, very good friend. Don, his relationship with Coach Tom Landry, who's a legendary figure. Coach Landry, I've got 10 books behind me about the Cowboys, at least 10. Coach Landry, a great, brilliant mind. There's some more great pictures. People are just going to look at these and be amazed. But what was his relationship, or did he share that with you, with the best coach the Dallas Cowboys have ever had? He won 270 games, was their coach for 29 years. Did he share anything about Coach Landry?
He did. Every time I brought Coach Landry up, he would get a smile on his face because he said he was so strict. But Don respected Landry for being strict on the field and off the field. They were pros, and they respected the fact that they were treating it like a job that had to be done as well as possible. Now, Landry had from the very beginning, he had a thing at training camp called the Landry Mile. So everyone had to race the Landry Mile within 6 minutes, or they could be cut from the team. But the first year, Don was a little overweight when he came to camp, and he couldn't make the 6 miles, the mile in 6 minutes. And so he was afraid they were going to cut him. But thank goodness they gave him a break. And he was always grateful to Landry for that.
It's an interesting story. Thomas Hollywood Henderson, a former linebacker that played for Dallas, I read about his account, and he said that when he couldn't make it either. And he said Landry's legs, at that time, even he still was in great shape, his definition of his legs and his hamstrings, even as an older man. Tom Landry was all about business. Now, I want to ask you about segregated Dallas at that time. It's important to note this, okay? It's important to note that Don Perkins played at a time when Dallas was still segregated. They had to fight for housing there. And it wasn't until cornerback Mel Renfro made an issue of it, and Tex Schramm didn't want him to do it. General manager Tex Schramm did not want him to do it. Mel Renfro made an issue of it, and they finally got, the players into places they weren't allowed before that. Talk a little bit about segregated Dallas during that time. It's an important part of this history, I'm sure.
It is. In fact, the Perkins family migrated from Texas, from the Dallas area to Iowa because of racism and segregation. Don's father got in a fight with a white man, and he knew that he was in big trouble for having done that. So he left immediately for the North and eventually to Iowa. When Don was signed by the Cowboys, he went to Dallas. They were going to go to a cafeteria, and he walked in, and one of the workers said, "We don't serve your kind here." It's just amazing. And of course, he and the people he was with all got up and left. He had this remarkable voice. You could never tell, that, I don't know, he was black or white or whatever. And he'd get on a phone and call about an apartment he knew was for rent. And they'd hear his voice, and they'd say, "Well, come on over, we'll show you the apartment." And by the time they got there, they saw him, and they suddenly announced that the apartment was already rented. And the Cowboys themselves had a tough time getting hotels to put their players in before games. It was only when the Ramada broke down and let them in that the other hotels did so too. And then with the Cowboys only for years only had black players roomed with other black players and whites with whites. That there was an odd number, the odd number person would have a room for himself because they would never mix them until Mel Renfro, Don's best friend on the Cowboys, made an issue of that. And so did Don.
That was 1966 or 67. I can't remember that they finally stopped doing that. And this isn't a knock on Coach Landry. Coach Landry's about business and didn't get involved so much in politics. He didn't. His thing was the game plan. He's looking ahead. He didn't have time to that. But I still say, in my opinion, had he said something, it would have been like, okay, we need to get this taken care of. But that was the times then, and Tom Landry told whatever the company line was at that time, even though it was wrong, and it was fixed later. But, Nick Backus tells me a great story. The Dallas and Giants had played, and the Cowboys land in Dallas, and Don had his family ready to go back to Albuquerque in the station wagon, didn't even want to stay in Dallas. He didn't want to stay in Texas. He did his job there, but he wanted to get back home to Albuquerque. Talk to us about what Don said to you about what Albuquerque meant to him.
Well, it was the best environment for him and especially for his family. They lived originally in the southeast part of Albuquerque, but then they moved to northwest Albuquerque, a racially mixed neighborhood right across from Taft Middle School, and they were incredibly comfortable there. They had very few incidents of racism in Albuquerque, and he was so pleased with that. He knew this was the right place to raise his kids.
Talk about that, the family man. You mentioned you showed some pictures there. You mentioned his son Randy, I believe. I got to talk to a son I was going to interview about 6-7 years ago on the radio. We just got our signals crossed. But talk about what his family, he's a family guy. We'll talk about what his, and none of his kids, and it's not a knock. They were good athletes. He had some good athletes in the family too. Of course, he's on another level. And not everyone's going to get those genes. That happens. But talk about what his family meant to him.
They meant everything to him. They did to the very end. They were so close. He was very anxious for them to succeed in whatever they wanted to do. He never pressured them. Every one of them told me he never pressured them to get to sports. They did, but it wasn't because of him. In fact, he everyone that would visit him told me that if you went to his house, you would never know he had won all those awards in the community and in football because he didn't have any of the awards in his house. And it was so that his kids and grandkids and everyone else wouldn't define him by that role. That they'd know him and trust him as a father and as a grandfather.
You know what does that say about him? Because there's so many people that want to, I played in high school, right? And we still talk about what's that song by Bruce Springsteen, Glory Days, but that says a lot about him because he had awards. He was a Cowboy Ring of Honor. I said that to one kid. I told you, one of my son's friends outside the pit. I saw Don, and I said, "Hey, this kid's a big Cowboy fan, or a kid at that time." And when I said, "Hey, this guy's in the Ring of Honor," Don is like, "No, I'm just Don Perkins." That he wanted you just to, as you mentioned, Richard, he didn't want to be defined by. It is an outstanding career. When you mentioned in the Ring of Honor, people's mouths drop, right? Because that's Cowboy immortality, right there, Cowboy Immortals, right there, and he was an immortal. But that wasn't what he was interested in as a definition of Don Perkins, and I can't say enough about that.
That's true. And in fact, he had a second marriage, and he had a stepdaughter. He went on a field trip with the stepdaughter, and all the kids got on the bus, and they all gathered around Don Perkins. And his stepdaughter asked why they were giving so much attention to him, and they said, "He's Don Perkins, a great football player." She didn't even know, because he wouldn't bring it up, even with his new family, his stepdaughter.
Now, that says so much. I didn't even know that story. And remember, this is a man that played in one of the NFL's most legendary games, the Ice Bowl. And did he mention? Okay, so some players had talked about permanent frostbite from that game. Did Don say anything to you about that game, or any kind of physical, malady, any kind of physical problems he suffered? As they said, receiver Bob Hayes wouldn't even take his hands out of his pants the whole game. Did Don mention anything to you about that game at all?
He sure did. He would smile, and he talked about how cold it was and how he couldn't get any traction. He couldn't run in it, and it was just barely able to stand up and hope to get on the side where it could be a little warmer. There's a story about Bob Hayes and his hands in his pants there.
Right.
Sounds funny, but the story is that it was a giveaway to the Packers, because when he put his hands, he was warming his hands, and they knew he was going to be in the next play as a receiver, and so that gave it away. He always denied that.
Go ahead.
He always denied that, but Don brought it up, and so did other people.
The Cowboys were down 14-0, made a comeback and went ahead 17-14, and of course that last legendary drive when the Cowboys were in a prevent defense, and they still say Jerry Kramer was offside.